Hello, New Zealand. Welcome to Straight Talk. This is episode number 63. Tonight we discuss, well, firstly, we get the panelists' reaction to the US election outcome. If Kiwis had voted in the US election, Kamala would have swept in. Why is that? The Treaty Principles Bill has been tabled. We asked the panelists, should we even have a debate? And what was the other? There was another story that we were going to cover, and I haven't written it down. Oh, that's right. Banning gang patches and swastikas. Will they also want to ban crosses? Right. I am on top of things. And I'm just going to take, well, actually, I'll introduce the panel firstly. Good looking lot, as usual. Alfred Naro, West Auckland, although I think he's just come back from Israel. Is that correct, Alfred?
Shalom, Bob, or Boker Tov, depending on what time of the day. Yes, just came back from Israel, so it's very safe. People said to me, were you okay? And I said the only time I felt anxious was on the Jerusalem road with crazy drivers that looked like they could have come out from Papakura, where you are, Bob, you know?
Manurewa.
Manurewa, Papakura, South Auckland, West Auckland, a combination of trying to drive down narrow roads. But no, it was good to be there.
Okay, not quite as dangerous as Rarotonga, though, eh? Beside you is Brendan Malone, who's doing a bit of carpentry. And I saw some photos on social media. Brendan, you're doing up your studio. Is that correct? Is this because One News is going down, you're going up?
Well, look, I hear they'll be selling it for $1 soon. So I thought, well, I might be able to pick up a few things in a bargain fire sale and start my own terrible version of propaganda. Why not? Yeah.
Okay, well done. Actually, I see you're on Substack now. So Simon O'Connor's there as well, and I am. So that's the propaganda. That is the home of disinformation. So welcome.
Well, between the three of us, mate, I reckon we could create some real misinformation.
I know. Now, Mel, you've got the Hikoi coming past you tomorrow, I think it is. Is that correct? You're up north?
It's, apparently so. And yeah, fair enough. It's not a big deal for me, but it is for lots of others. And of course, in Northland especially, you would sort of expect it to be.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that, actually, have a bit of a discussion. Got some interesting polling as well. Finally, in Christchurch is Dr. Michael Reid. How are you, Michael?
I'm good, thanks, Bob, and good evening, everyone.
Okay, and I'm just going to have a drink out of my cup. I hope you all noticed. Can you all see that? Yes, the Straight Talk cups have arrived. So all you panelists will be getting the first cup that you've ever earned. Probably the last cup you've ever earned as well. Right, the image of the week. I don't think you can go past this one. It shook the whole world, either for positive or for negative, when Fox News was first to project that Trump was elected. We'll come back to that one as well. The video of the week comes from Kamala, who did her acceptance speech. And unfortunately, the first 15 seconds of, not acceptance speech, her what do you call it? Concession, thank you. Her concession speech. This was the start of her concession speech, which the media didn't show you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good.
Wait for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yep, 6 times. I'm not sure if the teleprompter wasn't going or whether it's just, it was a tough night the night before. But anyway, okay, let's just have a look at the response to the US election. Alfred, what was your general take from last week?
Yeah, look, I was watching it while on an Emirates flight coming out of Dubai, and pretty much watched the whole process. And when he got to 246 collegiate votes, I just knew that he was there. Pennsylvania was just a foregone conclusion. But it was quite interesting, though. On the plane, there were some people who were Democrat voters who were very, very somber. And so there was only 2 of us. I won't say who he was, but Paul Samuels and I, we just sort of cheered, you see. We just said, we let out a bit of a Kiwi Yahoo. Look, it's the right thing. What was, I think, astounding for people and hard to understand on the left was how you could get so many working class, male, Black African Americans, Hispanics, I mean, the majority of these guys just came, and they called them, misogynist, narcissist, and they called them everything under the sun. But the reality is that this is where common sense is starting to prevail. People are starting to say, let's get back to some things that we knew, conservative values that were part of the Constitution that made up the United States of America. People want to have a say as parents about what their children are being taught. There are just so many things that I think that are part of that shift that's happened. I mean, and it's an incredible shift. I mean, you've got the upper house, the lower, you've got the Congress, you've got the Senate, he's got the popular vote. I mean, you've got to say that it's probably by far one of the most significant victories of any presidential candidate that's been as well. So a good night, a good win, and big tick for me.
Okay, and the interesting thing, actually, I was on an Emirates flight last year on the final of the Rugby World Cup when the All Blacks were playing, and as you walk down the aisle, the screen behind every chair was everybody was watching it. Was everybody watching it on the plane, or was it kind of just like the political nerds like you?
Yeah, look, I think there were only about 8 screens that were actually active, and the only connection we could get is BBC and CNN. So obviously there was no connection to Fox at all. But no, there wasn't a lot. And like I said, you could tell the Democrats because they basically switched off their screens, turned the lights off, and basically tried to go to sleep. But Paul and I sort of made sure that people understood that this was a moment to celebrate. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that CNN had half the viewership that it had for the 2020 election. It's just led so many viewers. Brendan, what was your general take on the election?
Well, I don't think it's surprising. You have a situation whereby you don't govern well, and the people, it's just this really simple. It's not rocket science. If you don't govern with prudence, you don't govern well, then people are going to say, we actually need change, we want change, and that's exactly what happened. And the simple fact is, despite all the silly excuses that are now being proffered, claiming sexism, misogyny, racism, you name it, she was a terrible candidate. Her whole history was one of being someone who has not campaigned well. And I see now, I don't know if you've caught up the latest news, but they fundraised $1 billion, all gone. Yeah. And they're apparently $25 million in debt as well. Yeah. Where did that money go? I bet you there's some people who've rorted this, but she has lived up to her history of not being a particularly good campaigner either, unfortunately.
Okay, and well, I tell you who did very well out of it was Oprah Winfrey, because I've heard that apparently she was paid $1 million to do that interview with Kamala Harris. So it wasn't actually a media interested in the politics. It was it was kind of like an infomercial, which we all knew anyway.
Well, Bob, did you see that, that Call Her Daddy, the pornography podcast that she went on? They paid 6 figures, over $100,000 for that. You don't have to pay the podcaster to appear on their show. So someone must have rorted that whole thing. It's just an absolute shocker.
Okay. But Trump was going on like podcasts, Joe Rogan, and it was millions and millions of views, just completely outdoing mainstream TV. So it was really a podcast election coverage more than mainstream media, which should worry the mainstream media. Mel, what was your general take from the result?
Not surprised. I was doing a live at the time with Elliot. I think we did coverage for a good couple of hours. And towards the end, you were quite amped up. You were waiting for him to come on stage. We showed that live. There was a really good atmosphere. Elliot is of course, a big fan. He had his hat on the whole time. I'm like, well, he's definitely the better person. And the speech came, and Elliot was really fired up about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, is it ever going to end? And he really got, speech. He got really detailed on storytelling. But then again, different perspectives. He wanted to honor a lot of people. I've heard a lot of people talk about him being, he's so anti-female, but look at who he's appointed already. So it's not a big surprise. I think the surprise is that so many were surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was the point I made, was that it was a great speech, but it wasn't your typical victory speech. It was very different, but it was still a great speech because he was making it and not Kamala. Michael, what was your takeaway from last week?
Oh, well, Bob, I called it, didn't I? You've got
You
it
did.
on record from an earlier Straight Talk. Yeah, and I noticed your byline there, which has just gone off screen, says the US election, or the US election. But it's not the celebs. It wasn't the screaming progressives. It wasn't the mainstream media. It wasn't all the pro-Democrat pundits. It was the US election, Bob. Ordinary people, the great unwashed that are never going to be grabbing the headlines. But that's where the power of democracy lies, in the people, and the people spoke. And I don't think there's any surprises there. I mean, that this whole global trend that the mainstream media is just so out of touch with ordinary people and lived experience. And we see it on a grand scale, of course, in the US and what happened last week.
Yeah, and look, some of the stats showed, not that one, sorry, the Harris coverage was 84% positive, 89% negative. That was in the period leading up to the actual election. There was a huge bias. Brendan, did you have a comment about the media?
Well, I think one other thing that's really interesting to note in all this, Bob, is that the dark arts of political polling have been shown to be little more than sorcery now, it seems. It's just pure guesswork, not actual predictive science at all. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Let's just check was there any... Oh, team, don't forget you can raise your hand, just that little bit down the bottom there, and just raise hand. That's the only reason that I let Brendan say something. Let's check the comments. Nav in the house says, I know my KiwiSaver is going to love the next 4 years. Is that correct? Did I send that through, Gordon? Let me try again. There we go. Nav in the house. I know my KiwiSaver is going to love the next 4 years. Ricky says 48 million currently, the interview with Joe Rogan. I mean, TV channels would just dream of those types of numbers. I mean, that's getting up to Straight Talk viewership. June says the 6-figure number was to build the set on that podcast. The podcast. What was that podcast,
That's right.
Brendan?
Call her daddy.
Yeah, Call her daddy. Yeah. Where they talked about how much they loved abortion. The podcaster had to go to her, so they dressed up a space close to her where she was at the time. Here we go. Mel Elliott's watching. Trump, baby, let's go. Here he is. What a radical. Craig says, sorry, I'm watching a documentary about trans men having babies. Nah, just kidding. Actually, we're going to do a fact check on that, because apparently there's a documentary on tonight about a woman having a baby. And they've, for some reason, it's quite fascinating to them all. All right, let's move on to the next topic. This one's a little bit more serious, but getting lots of media coverage. The 4-page Treaty Principles Bill has been introduced. It'll be debated in Parliament this week. The bill states that it would set out the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi in legislation and require those principles to be used when interpreting legislation where relevant. But the bill's final clause states nothing in the bill would amend the text of the Treaty of Waitangi. Now, it's going to go to a select committee, 6-month public hearing process. So this is going to go on for a while. And after select committee, it'll be sent back for the second reading, where only ACT says it's going to vote for it. Let's just check out a couple of clips before we check with the panel.
The protesters' message was clear. Livid, the government's pushing ahead with its Treaty Principles Bill.
Chris Luxon will have a legacy of sowing racial division within Aotearoa.
David Seymour, though,
today's important for our democracy,
taking to social media to celebrate.
This bill is about equal rights, and it asks New Zealanders to talk about what our treaty really means for our future.
His backers supported him via messages online. Others, though, less impressed.
What we have is the mana of our tupuna relegated down to a 4-page joke of a bill.
This bill is going to be divisive. It's going to rip up the fabric of Aotearoa.
That's what we're asking the Prime Minister to do. He has the power to kill this bill, and the sooner he does it, the better.
The Prime Minister didn't show up to question time today.
The Prime Minister, should front his kaka. He created this paru, he's agreed to this paru, he should front it and front the people that he's absolutely hurt.
Christopher Luxon's promising National will kill the bill after it's been through a 6-month select committee process. Until then, it's looking like there will be 6 months of protests for him to endure, starting with a hikoi leaving Cape Reinga on Monday.
Okay, so there will be a lot of media coverage, wall to wall, in fact. Unfortunately, some might be concerned about the bias in that already, and that was evident. David Seymour turned up on One Breakfast last week. I just want to show you this clip because it went viral over the weekend. And just watch how the introduction is done. But David Seymour gives as good as he gets.
Tuesday, the controversial Treaty Principles Bill will be debated in Parliament. The bill, which seeks to redefine our founding document, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, has sparked what could be the largest mobilisation this country's seen in modern history. A 9-day hikoi will begin in Northland on Sunday. Organisers say events throughout the march aim to share how Te Tiriti uplifts all New Zealanders. The hikoi will culminate in a mass gathering on Parliament grounds on November 10. Well, ACT leader David Seymour is behind the bill. He joins us in studio now. Morena. Before we even get to that, can we talk about the timing of the bill? Why was it changed?
Well, can we, before we even get to that, can we start with your introduction? Because it is not a divisive bill. It is some people's opinion that it's a divisive bill. Your job is to reflect the views of all New Zealanders, not to take sides. Second of all, as a matter of fact, it does not change the Treaty of Waitangi at all. It changes the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, which was set down by Parliament in 1975. Now, if we can just start with a bit of fairness and a few facts, then I'm very happy to look at your other questions.
Okay, well, I guess one question is, are we going to get fairness and facts in this debate? But Brendan, what's your general feel on this? Should we even be having this debate, or is it going to rip up the cohesion of New Zealand?
No, I don't think. Look, if it was going to rip up the cohesion of New Zealand, we are a very immature nation, and we've gone, basically, if we can't have big public conversations about big issues. What I find frustrating, though, is that if we're going to have a 6-month select committee process, and there is an indication that the public do want some movement on this, for all of the major parties to then just turn around and even now preemptively, like, for example, National indicating they're just not going to support it, I do have a problem with that, because that makes a farce of what is supposed to be a proper, open, democratic system. And so if you're just going to say, well, we're going to let these people play some games for 6 months, that's a waste of time. It's a waste of parliamentary resources, and it is not how open society should function. But no, your first question, Bob, I don't think it's going to rip up the fabric of our society. It's just going to be a good, robust debate. And, we need those. They're good in societies.
Okay, Christopher Luxon in his post-cabinet presser this afternoon said his party doesn't support the Treaty Principles Bill. It is divisive. There's nothing in the bill that he likes, and the National Party sees no need for it, and that he would consider meeting with the protesters from the hikoi making its way to Parliament. I mean, there's a lot of people saying, wow, totally different treatment from both the media and the politicians compared to the mandate protest in Parliament a couple of years ago. Anyway, Mel, what's your feelings on this?
Very, very different coverage. I was down at the protest, and anyway, that'll get me on a totally different, we won't go there. But 6 months, they're going to look into it for 6 months and do public submissions and stuff. Why hasn't that been the norm for so many other laws that have been changed? That's actually really sad. How fast did the abortion one go through? I mean, how long did that last? Debate. I think the country needs lots of debates. I think we need to relearn how to debate in a healthy way without going feral or, just debate is healthy. And I agree with Brendan to sort of, go through this whole process and then go, well, regardless of what everyone thinks, says and feels, submits and everything else, we're just going to make this stand.
Yeah. Michael, do you think we should have this debate, or do you think it's too divisive, as Luxon says?
Oh, Bob, I think we absolutely need this debate. That's what a democracy is all about. And we should be able to debate this issue as any other. And I think what that clip you showed of David Seymour on Breakfast, the whole dialogue was being introduced as controversial, and the media is consistently pushing that. I mean, who says it's controversial? One side certainly does. Jenny May Coffin also said it's redefining our founding document. If you have a look at it, it's doing no such thing. So David Seymour was actually quite right to say what he said. It's not the Beltway bureaucrats, Bob. It's not the tribal elites. It's not the academics. It's not the activists and the judges. It's ordinary people that get to have a say with this. And I think that is so healthy and so necessary for a functioning democracy. And it's very disappointing the leader of the National Party, Chris Luxon, the Prime Minister, listening to him on this reminds me of a quote that the former British journalist, now deceased, Paul Johnson, once said about John Major. He said he's like a cushion bearing the impress of the last backside that sat on him. And that's what Chris Luxon's like. He's so wet. He's so indecisive, and he should know. And the National Party should know that the country voted for change and voted against co-governance and ethno-anarchists in the Te Pāti Māori. But, we want this, we need this. It's important. Let's have a debate about it. And let's, most of all, have some fairness in our media. But I strongly suspect, Bob, we're not going to get that.
Alfred, I think you might have a slightly differing view.
Oh, no, I agree that we should have a debate. Our challenge as a country is that we don't always know how to debate. And what concerns me is that who's leading the debate, who's asking the leading questions. The problem with this that I see is that it's like, here are the 10 commandments. We're not going to discuss what they are because they are in stone. They're a foundation, but we're going to talk about how we apply them. And all of a sudden we're talking about principles. The thing is that before you talk about principles, the nation needs to know actually what's the history and heritage of the Treaty of Waitangi. And I tell you this, many of them don't. In fact, research has shown is that there are very few people who have been on a marae, who have actually had a conversation, know what the history and heritage was. But here's David Seymour, and I have to say, my view is that I have no trust for David Seymour. And when he talked about having a referendum, by the way, that's exactly what he did around euthanasia. He said exactly the same thing, that with this, I'm going to use the same strategy that I did for euthanasia. By the way, you're right, Mel, 6 months. Well, euthanasia had 2 years of submissions, of going through select committee, and even then they couldn't come to an agreement. And here's what was said, they let it go through to a referendum. But what some of us argued with, when we knew that we didn't have the numbers, then do justice, let the nation know what actually euthanasia is actually all about. Bob, your own research showed most people thought that euthanasia was just turning off the plug of a life support machine. I can tell you this now, most people would have no idea what the Treaty of Waitangi is actually really all about. What was its intention? What was some of the history? What were some of the breaches? But no, we're going to bypass all of that history and we're going to go straight to trying to decide. Remember, since 1975, now that to me is the sign where it's going to be very dangerous. We're not going to do anything good for a nation of uniting a people. We're now going to go into a seat of judgment. We're never going to tell the public exactly what the history is. That's what concerns me about this. And the last thing it said, I was down in Te Awamutu on the weekend, on Saturday, and this question was raised. Someone said to me, Alfred, how do we talk about this? And I said to them, well, firstly, don't let the government decide relationships that you have with Māori. You define it. You go to the people who are Māori that you know, that could be your neighbours, friends. If you haven't, then start to make a relationship. Do your own research. Start to look into itself. Don't let the court of public opinion, what politicians do to try and define your perception, but more importantly, your relationships in your communities with Māori that are in your community as well. And that's the concern I have. We're going to have this voyeurism of conversation where people never actually have a real conversation with a Māori community on a marae or in another place, but somehow we're going to have this reality TV type conversation about a constitutional issue. And it's that luxury that we said that we can talk, we can debate, but we never get our hands dirty. That's what concerns me.
Okay, but I guess the pushback on that statement is, who do we trust more to make decisions like this? Do we support the politicians or do we trust the people, which is why some people support a referendum?
No, that's too lazy, Bob. I totally disagree with you. Are you saying to me you don't have the ability to go and find and talk to people around you, have your own conversation? This is the reason why we've become so dependent on a political system to decide things that are really important for us. Why is it that you and I cannot go out and begin to form a relationship? Why are we saying that, oh, well, we'll let the government define how we see Māori, how we see that history and our heritage? And I can tell you this now, if that's how the position we're going to take, then we're only going to be ourselves. I can tell you it'll be worse for us. And by the way, if you want to get a snapshot into David Seymour and the true intent, Bob, you know, because you posted this, and that was the fact is that one of the reviewers that wasn't renewed in regards to the Committee for Euthanasia, right, end of life dying, actually posted that there was a woman that had actually been euthanized, and but the concern that was raised is that she didn't speak English and there was no interpreter. Now I can tell you this, Bob. I know that I argued and I put something on X because during that time my supplementary order paper 259 talked about the importance around cultural competency and the need for interpreters, and we should have. We've got over 30% of our population that don't speak English, that are born overseas. David Seymour said, we don't need that, and he took it out. Now, what does that tell you? That tells me that we've got a guy that only sees, you know, it's some chocolate covered, sort of coated, you know, it's that song, what we need is a great big melting pot. Somehow we'll all get together, we'll just be one big happy family, and as long as we look and speak, you know, one language, one way, I get concerned about that, man. There's too much fruit of his intent, political intent, that has to raise concerns. I'm up for the debate, but the person starting the debate, the questions that are leading the debate, right, and the content of it, to me, are all wrong.
Okay, let me just show you, there has been some polling. Now, as Brendan rightly alluded to, you can't always trust polling, but this was the Courier Market research, and Courier Market is the national pollster, so we can't say it's biased. But what it found was 46% support for the bill, 25% opposed, 29% still making their mind up. The poll, that was October just gone last month. A year ago, the support was at 60%. That dropped when the government changed. So a lot of, the pollster said that a lot of Labour and Green Party supporters of the bill changed their view when their party went into opposition. So, Brendan, is part of the problem the person who's leading this debate? Because I think it would be fair to say that there's suspicion around David Seymour, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a factor, and that's one of the things I was quite interested in sort of gauging Alfred on. And look, Alfred, I love your work, and I think I agree with what the heart of what you're saying here is that basically Seymour is no friend of authentic conservatism. And as an authentic conservative, I think we must be respecters of tradition, and tradition really matters. And the different ethnic populations have their own traditions, and they all come together in a meaningful way, not some weird, bizarre sort of, meaningless melting pot that doesn't mean anything. However, I guess, Alfred, my question is what there clearly does seem to be an excess that's crept in here in regards to some of these issues. So how would you see a healthy, legitimate debate really playing out in regards to that excess? So perhaps where things have gone a bit off the rails, we can sort of course correct in a way that's healthy.
Oh, look, I agree. I think that, I remember challenging Willie Jackson. This is the problem with, we go left and right wing politics, right? The pendulum swings from one swing end to the other. And then we don't actually sit in the middle. I'll tell you that I remember that one time when I was in Parliament, I spoke with Shane Jones and I said, hey, are you guys, in your manifesto, and you got voted in, you were going to abolish the Māori seats. And he said to me, oh, yeah, no, it's too hard. I said, no, it's not. I said, I've actually done some research on it. And I think actually it poses a very good question. I think the way you've done it and use it as a political football has meant the fact is that you say it's too hard. But actually, if you have a look at the intention about how it started, where it came from, it was actually an arbitrary decision because, remember, Parliament began in 1854. There was no ability for Māori to vote because at that time, the laws of the land are that you had to be an owner of land. And so then there was set up. So all I'm saying is that I think that you're right, but it's how do you then have the conversation? How do we understand what the and we shouldn't start off our intent by the excess. We need to go back to some sensible things about, well, how does the treaty actually mean to us? Don't forget that in 2015, for 2 years, there was a nationwide conversation on the Constitution. And that was led by Peter Sharples and a number of others that went out. It was cross-party, and there was no agreement because there could be no consensus about what actually would form that constitution. Now we're holding what we have. But I agree with you. I'm up for the conversation, and I think that they should be had. I just get concerned, and it's not just about conservatism. I've seen too much of David Seymour's work that concerns me about the outcome. And we're already, some of what we're seeing now with the euthanasia, to me just sees that actually the outcomes are never going to be good for people.
Okay, Michael and Mel, I'll come to you on this because I think the concern has been that over the past, especially the past Labor government 6 years, that there's been an expansion of policy that has not favoured Pacifica, hasn't favoured New Zealanders in general, hasn't been based on need. It has been predominantly for Māori, and that has got a lot of people's backs up. And then, as well as that, you've got the Supreme Court and the judiciary making decisions that have been reinterpreting the Treaty of Waitangi the way the court wants to. And it's not me saying that, it's the New Zealand Initiative have just released a paper expressing concerns. Michael, do you think that that's been part of the problem, that there has been reinterpretation while we've not been looking, and now people are sort of saying, hey, let's bring it back to some sensibility? Is there fairness in that?
Yeah. Look, I think, Bob, there's been endless definition and redefinition. And the Waitangi Tribunal was meant to be an advisory group. Well, it's sort of been a de facto lawmaking group, and it has expanded. And I totally agree about David Seymour. I mean, we've had him on this program, and he's no friend of conservatives. We certainly know that. And his modus operandi, Alfred, is questionable. But in government, which you know about, I mean, fiscal responsibility is a key. And what's wrong in trying to define what the treaty means in contemporary culture? And so we might not agree with the messenger. We might not even agree with some of the methods, but the underlying issue is really important. And I think there's been far too much power in certain groups. And one thing about this legislation, even now, I mean, it's not going to get over the line. We know that. But it's going to get people talking. I think your concern, Alfred, is that people talk in ignorance. I mean, I have read the treaty. It's not a hard read. I've looked at Seymour's bill, and I think it doesn't seem too problematic for me, but other people will read it in different ways. But at least we're talking about it, and I think that is really, really important.
Mel, can I just get, you're up north. You're sort of in the heartland of some of the issues, especially the need around Māori. What's the general heartbeat up there for this whole thing?
It differs. It really differs based on who you talk to. Quite a few people I've talked to actually just don't get the gist of exactly what's going on. They're quite confused about it all. And everyone, there are so many, I guess, different understandings of the treaty. For me, how I was brought up, my direct descendant is Henry Williams. So I was brought up quite strongly in what he did and how it impacted the nation. And, it's been amazing. And then I go and do papers for early childhood and we do the treaty, yet the answers they want are different from my understanding. So it is a little bit, I guess up in Northland, it can be there's quite a lot of division, but there's still there's still a want for everyone to just be equal and move on and have equality.
Yeah. Alfred, I'll come to you. I just want to read just a couple of these statements that have come in, or just one. Kevin says, Alfred, I don't trust Seymour, but I find Maori entitled and everyone in New Zealand comes from somewhere, so we must have a debate. And Jeff says only 36% trust the Waitangi Tribunal to be accurate with the treaty. This is from the Human Rights Commission's research. So, Alfred, do you agree with the kind of premise that I put, that already the principles have been expanded, interpreted by judiciary, by politicians, by Willie Jackson, and people are just saying, hang on, let's just tie-ho and let's just get these a bit more understandable and fair. I mean, is that a fair statement?
So one of the things is that when you introduce a new law in Parliament, the understanding is that the premise or the principle is that you're trying to amend a wrong or something that needs to be, fixed, a problem that's the, and so you have a problem definition. Well, and, Michael's right about, the treaty and how it stands. Under national, we actually completed 159 in 9 years treaty settlements. Labor only did 9. So what I'm saying is that despite all the complexity, whether it was reports from the Waitangi Tribunal, we had Chris Finlayson as our Attorney General and also our Minister of Treaty Settlements. So he completed that with iwi, and actually the process of getting them through was something that was successful. Now, when you listen to all of his speeches, he will always say this at the end of that speech when they're passing the treaty settlement, we're only talking about maybe 2 or 3% of what's actually, truly afforded that could be given to compensation in regards to compensation. So he acknowledged the fact is that the common good of both the iwi, the Crown, coming together to an agreement. Why? Because people wanted a settlement. So what I'm saying here is that actually we're only now, I think if I'm right, there's only about 10 that may be left or 12 treaty settlements left. So why are we now wanting to get another bill to try and fix something that we've almost completed that process? I do agree, though, as Michael said, that I think the pendulum went too far. I think people that have, like the Labour Party, Willie Jackson, a whole lot of others, and especially around co-governance and so forth, they just pushed the envelope too far. So all I'm saying is that why are we now talking about it now? We're almost completed the set of treaty settlements. And now he's said, no, we're not going to go back over those. But then why are we actually having this conversation? I think there needs to be a broader conversation about actually knowing the history, knowing the past, then how do we actually work together from a bicultural foundation to a multicultural society that we have now? We don't talk about those things. And I can tell you, because I run, and Bob, you've been on the Footprints of Faith. We took you up to Rangihawa to see some of that history. There are very few people that go up to understand the rich history between Māori and Pākehā that have happened. But instead, what we have now, I think that's what I get concerned about, is we're having this conversation almost at the end of a treaty settlement process.
But this debate isn't actually about righting the wrongs or the injustices that were done as a result of the treaty. This debate is more about where do we go to from here and how do we interpret the treaty, isn't it?
Yeah, well, no, because remember the treaty principles is, and as Michael rightly said, you've got different advisory committees that are involved now. So it's going to set a set of principles. So now the government departments and others can actually work from those set of principles. Look, I do believe there's work needed to be done. But here's the concern I have is that why is it then going into the court of public opinion? Why are we going to have a referendum to decide this? Yes, he wants the intent is to have a wider conversation. We had 2 years of, like I said, a constitutional. They met in town halls, and if you look at the report that came back, there were very good conversations that we had there. I think there was a need to take that on. I just get concerned about the way that this debate will be held. And like I said, when I think about the person who's holding it, I have no confidence that he has the ability to have a rational, a well thought out conversation with a good intent to facilitate some great outcomes for the nation and for not only bicultural relationships, but also multicultural relationships.
Okay. Brendan, do you think we can have this debate? I mean, we've actually had a bit of a debate just in the last 10, 15 minutes, haven't we? I'm not quite sure that we're not allowed to.
Well, I think part of the problem here is I look at this and I think in some ways, National's stance of let's just do 6 months of sort of let's open up a wound, and I think I probably agree with Alfred here, then pointless. What is that going to do? That's probably just going to throw salt. It's like throwing a hand grenade into a room, then walking away. To me, that's fruitless. There should be a longer period of discussion. I agree with Alfred. You got to understand the history, and there's a lot of rich history there. And I do have to say that as much as I try and sort of put aside the messenger, which is Seymour, it is pretty clear that Seymour is interested in David Seymour. That's his primary thing. It's what's my legacy going to be? And there is a danger in that. There is a real risk that what we could end up with is a very destructive process that is quite suitable to David Seymour's very ego-driven political ambitions, but isn't necessarily really in the best interest of the country. And I say that because I think if you have an authentic conservative mind, you understand something Alfred is talking about here, and that is you must have caution in the way you make laws. And you must, it's better to be gently catch a monkey rather than just gung-ho tearing everything up. That's the revolutionary way. And so I do have a concern about that. But I do think we can have the conversation. And I think Alfred's already indicated that we must have the conversation about excesses that have crept in. And I don't think the current approach is going to help that, saying let's just open up a wound for 6 months and then we'll just walk away. I think that's going to leave a lot of people on both sides just really angry.
Okay, we need to move on. Michael, did you want to add anything to the discussion?
Oh, it's just fascinating listening to the different views, Bob. And but here's a question: who is qualified to pass judgments on this? What is the connection? And I'm thinking sort of philosophically as well as practically between a bicultural society and a multicultural society. What's the interface? We hear a lot of loose talk, Bob, conceptually around these things. And some people will say, bicultural society, multicultural society, but it's just not as simple as that. To what extent are we a multicultural society? And if we are, how does the treaty speak to cultures and peoples beyond the two original signatories? The two different people groups. I mean, these are important questions. And who is qualified to talk about it? Is it an activist judge? Is it the Helen Clark Foundation? Just had to put that in there. I mean, I think it's great that people are talking about it, and we must do it respectfully. And I agree, Brendan, that we have to somehow separate Seymour as the person and his track record, which we know very well. And there are aspects of the process that can be questioned, but let's have a respectful debate. Let's read our history. I think that's really important, Alfred. But one of the problems there, of course, is you get one book offering one perspective, and then you go to the next shelf and you get another book. So who is the person on the street to really believe? Because I think there does need to be some real restraint about this thing. You talk, Alfred, about Chris Finlayson and the Treaty Settlements Bill, and that's a pretty impressive record compared to Labor. But, I don't think it would end with the ones that are currently on the books, because the Waitangi Tribunal has an incredible ability to, I won't say invent, but I can't think of a better word, any grievances from anyone. It just goes on and on and on. And isn't Seymour right to say, look, let's have a debate? And even if his motive was fiscal, to say, there is no end to the money that can be spent on grievances, and so let's just have this debate. And I think that's a good thing.
Okay, Mel, did you want to make a comment? Brendan, I'll come to you. I see your hand raised. You good, Brendan?
All good.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say to Michael's point, I think this also speaks to perhaps what Alfred's saying as well, is that a constitution is not simply a political tool, and a treaty's the same. And I think that's how it's being treated by people on both sides, actually. A constitution is a reflection of something that is actually lived and embodied by the people. And if it's not embodied, and it feels like at the moment it's not, and that's where you got to get to that deeper question, well, what are our actual first principles? What is our view of ourselves as human persons and as a nation? And we're not having that part of the conversation. And that's, otherwise it is just this bizarre debate as if a treaty is a mechanical device that you can just sort of impose upon people. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And look, there has been concern about, for example, the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, and doing their own interpretation of the treaty. They did their own interpretation of societal values when they deregistered Family First. So that's what worries me. I mean, I guess, look, just to finish with, Alfred, who makes this decision? How do you think we get to a point of agreement, or can we?
Thank you for allowing my. I notice I got a brown hand, so that's quite culturally appropriate, Bob. Did you arrange that? Brendan had a yellow hand. That was a bit.
Oh yes, that's all wrong.
But
hepatitis C.
Look, I agree. I think that, and as I said in Te Awamutu, that, you know, first and foremost, you know, we need to be having these conversations in our own communities, in our own homes. We need to be talking with our children. You know, these are things that are really important, because actually that's what make us who we are. But you know, the truth is, we never really know ourselves until we're outside of the country that we live in. I mean, do you remember I asked someone, well, do you know when the we started singing the national anthem in Māori? And they said no. Well, first of all, just a little fact is that in 1878, it was actually translated in Māori from English, from Thomas Bracken. But it was when Hene Wehe Mohi, that it was in remember the All Black Test at Carter Farms Park in 1991? And she just went out and did it. Sometimes change just happens. And it was actually the New Zealand Rugby Union, after a whole lot of hoo-ha from a lot of people, just turned around and said, no, here's what we're going to do. We're going to sing it in Māori first, then sing it in English. And guess what? It just changed the culture. Sometimes things are disruptive. Sometimes we need to be out of the country to appreciate who we are as a people. But at the same time, too, I think we need to have the debate. Governments should never be the ones that, you know, define some of that. I think communities need to hold those conversations. And I agree, Michael, we need to have them in our churches and in our places and talk about this and talk about why it's really important, because, you know, even Tamati Iti, he turned around in Waitangi this year, and I saw him being interviewed, and he said, you know what I come to realize is that we can't preach to the converted. We've got to be talking to other people. And so now you've got an activist who's willing to talk. I just think that there's a timing of things, and I believe that the season is right. People do want to talk, like I said, and I agree with you, Brendan, that I think what National and others have done is said, yep, we'll just, because it's a coalition agreement, we'll open it up. It's irresponsible. I hope that they will carry it on and say, no, this is how we want to have the conversation. This is how we want to have it. Let's keep this going and do it right. And I believe that that's going to be, you know, what's important at the end. So, yeah.
Alfred, you did allude to it just before, and is it fair to say, though, that certain people like Willie Jackson and others certainly threw money and gave this perception of using the treaty as a justification for, well, in my view, doing what the Democrats did in the States, and that's buying votes from supporter groups. I mean, you sat across the House from that, watching it go on. You alluded to that earlier on. That perception has been part of the problem, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's a concern about leadership, you know, right across the board, whether you're in Parliament or whether you're in community. I think we start to see that start to happen with certain people and what they do. And I suppose that's where we need good people to make a stand. I mean, you often quote that Billy Graham quote that you have, Bob, when good people, you know, speak out, speak truth, and have the courage to do that, it stiffens the spines of other people. And I hope that we can have that type of conversation. I mean, look, here I was in Te Awamutu, and we had a great conversation, but we started it off differently. We started off about how people understood themselves with friends, people they grew up with, people they knew. And, you know, once we started to do that, then we could move into some deeper things. But you had to get the seating right. And I think the last thing I'd say is that someone came up to me and said to me, you know, that's the most authentic conversation I've had about that in a long time that I can remember.
Okay, let's get on to something slightly lighter, team. Let's talk about the election that has just been Trump swept into power. But if the vote had been held just amongst New Zealanders, then, believe it or not, Kamala would have swept into power. 55. So they did this poll, Talbot Mills. They asked respondents in New Zealand who would you vote for? 55% for Kamala, 21% for Trump, 12% wouldn't vote, and that grey is about 11%, I think, and that is that they 8%, sorry, weren't sure. Here's the interesting thing, though. Men were still slightly in favour of Harris. Hope you like that photo there, AI. Women were definitely in favour of Harris. When it was broken down into parties, New Zealand First supporters definitely favoured Trump. ACT split. National Harris, Te Pāti Māori Harris, Labour for Harris. And look at the Green Party there. 4% of Green voters like Trump. I mean, they've got to be a brave Green voter, to like Trump. And just in terms of the age breakdown, the only group that favoured Trump over Harris was males under 30, which actually was consistent with the vote in the United States as well. It attracted males, including black and Hispanic males as well. So, Mel, just back to that first one. Why is it that New Zealand is so in favour of Kamala when she just got slammed in the election?
I'm going to answer this question on the idea that that poll is possibly correct, although who knows. But I actually went out over the weekend because this really intrigued me, especially in the 30 and under males. So I went and asked quite a lot of people. I talked to young lesbian couples. I talked to males 30 and under. It was I think it was the over 60s that surprised me that they would vote for Harris on such a big scale. That was a bit of a what's going on.
Yeah, you
So
think they have
I've-
brains at that age?
Oh, that was really surprising. So I've asked a lot of people, and it's been really, really intriguing and interesting. A lot of people know me, so they didn't want to give their opinion, especially those that are sort of left-leaning. So I had to be totally non-biased and open to what they said.
They weren't on an Emirates flight coming back from Israel, were they?
It's been really interesting. So a lot of it has to do, in my opinion, from what I've heard, on algorithms, especially for females. And it might sound really silly, but TikTok is a huge, huge thing. It really is. Not so much for the conservatives, but it is for the left. And you add in, women have a tendency to follow a lot of singers, superstars, actors, more so than men. Now, when you've got all those people out there saying, vote Harris, and I think Billie Eilish was quoted as saying there is a war on women after Trump got in. What's been going on in her concerts is trending. It's big time trending. So once you watch this, and then your algorithms start to set themselves, so that's all you start seeing is anti-Trump and feminism stuff. For males, quite the same. The males under 30, they're sick of feminism and they're sick of their masculinity being under attack. But if you ask a female about that, they'll say that males under 30 are all sexist and racist, which is actually really sad because there's this huge division that's happening. But I think social media's got a lot to do with it. It's been really interesting. Bit of a surprise.
Well said. I mean, that was such an intelligent answer that I think the guys are going to sound thick compared to you for their answer. But anyway, we'll try our luck. Michael, what do you reckon?
That was my last.
Oh, Bob, look, I think there's been such an overwhelmingly negative media presentation of Trump in this country. And there's probably a strong anti-Trump, not necessarily pro-Harris aspect to it. The demographic breakdown and the political party breakdown is really interesting. But of course, none of this matters because we're not in the US. But it's just, I think it's a reflection really of our mainstream media and how it's presented Trump, how it's presented the whole election, really. So no surprises for me, Bob.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it is. It's 2-1. Kamala Harris compared to Trump, 2-1 if Kiwis had voted. Brendan, what do you think the reason is? Do you agree with Michael that we just get constant negative media bias on this?
I think what's interesting here is it'll be interesting to see a breakdown of the age demographics that they actually polled. I suspect a lot more people who are available for polling might also be news watchers. That's why, and I think over 60s is a reflection of that. They are very much propagandized by what the media tells them the world is. I know a lot of people in this demographic. And it takes a bit more effort to go and actually look for yourself. Whereas if you're younger, you're going to be probably on X and spaces like that, and you're going to see the whole gamut across the board. I also, something I think that's interesting is I listened to a really great podcast that came out last week from Barry Weiss's organization, and it was about Trump, and it was the difference between a BSer and a liar. And they said basically Trump is a BSer. And Americans actually have an affinity with people who BS them. They however, political trajectory of this, they hate liars. The Democrats have been liars. That's malicious. That's angry. A BSer is an exaggerator and in a nutshell. And yeah, that's it. And I think that we don't get that in New Zealand. We don't perhaps have that same affinity with all of that. And if you've got news media that's telling you that he's the next Hitler and misrepresenting everything, then, you know, how are you going to know unless you go checking?
Yeah. Okay. So, speaking of bluster, Alfred, what do you reckon?
Well, I think that, you know, like Brendan said, that, you know, if he was a New Zealand politician, I think it could be a different story. I mean, I was listening to Cavalier Johnson, who's a Milwaukee mayor and a Democrat, and he said that the politics have changed now where males are voting for strong rather than wrong. I thought it was a really interesting statement. And so they're actually looking at strong candidates. And because he had that alpha male type approach, they said, this is us. And that's why he said that there was an overwhelming shift from male, normal Democratic voters. There was a guy from Philadelphia talking about that. These are the truck drivers, the oilers and so forth, who had voted Democrat all their life, but they couldn't stand Kamala because she didn't have a strong sense of presence or direction or leadership. She couldn't even talk. And so that was, you know, a big problem for them. So they shifted. And so I think that if we had a Trump-like character in New Zealand, then I think that we would have seen the same thing too. We would have had people voting, mainly men. Yeah.
Okay, we have got 2 minutes, and I really want to ask you this question, team. There's a social media ban for children under the age of 16 is set to come into effect in Australia before the end of next year. Australian leaders have signed off on world-leading measure, and let me just, before I just get your opinion, let me just show you what Albanese said.
All 6 Australian states and territories today uniting on a promise to protect children from the dangers of social media.
This one's for the mums and dads. Social media is doing harm to our kids, and I'm calling time on it.
A complete ban for those under 16 in a bid to protect them from harm.
I want Australian parents and families to know that the government has your back.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's big move follows the death of 12-year-old Sydney schoolgirl Charlotte O'Brien, who took her own life just 8 weeks ago after relentless bullying.
Hi, I'm going to my Year 6 farewell tonight, and I just want to say thank you.
Her final plea for help left in a note after receiving a social media message while she was alone in her bedroom. Her parents, Matt and Kelly, carried her ashes in a teddy bear to Canberra.
This is Charlotte.
Delivering a direct message to the government, this is what can happen when social media goes unchecked.
She was in charge in life, and she's still very much in charge now. She's giving us directions every day.
This onus will be on the platforms.
While the proposal has gained cross-party support, there are concerns about how effective it will be, with some experts arguing it delays exposure and fails to teach children how to be safe online. But Charlotte's parents welcomed the move.
There is no question in my mind that it's the right decision. This will save lives of our kids.
And
okay, now Christopher Luxon was asked his opinion just very quickly.
I've got some interest in that idea actually, just with respect to what we've seen with respect to cyberbullying in particular in New Zealand, and we've seen some real advantage of the cell phone ban across the schools, but that's something that frankly our Cabinet hasn't discussed in detail, but it's something that I'd be open.
Okay, Michael, do you think we should ban it? Is it too difficult? Is the cat out of the bag? Is there another way to do it? What do you think?
Oh, Bob, I think you've summed it up there. Really, the cat is out of the bag.
Yeah, I mean, when Jonathan Haidt spoke at our conference, he said that part of it is getting the whole community buy-in, because then it takes away the peer pressure, both on parents to provide the phone and kids to be on social media. Mel, do you think this is the solution?
Oh, I think it's an awesome start. I'm all for it in New Zealand. I really am. Combined with actually reinstating some power for parents and authority. Yeah, go for it.
So you made an interesting point just before, because in our previous topic, you were talking about the voting for Kamala. You talked about algorithms. And one of the arguments is that it's not necessarily the social media that's the problem, it's the algorithms which are deliberately targeted to addict the child and to attract them to want more of what they're getting. So do you think maybe that's a better approach?
I think it all goes hand in hand. And I think that once, we've had so many youth that have come to us that are 14, 15, 16 that are addicted to porn online. And I think that stems from somewhere, and it's obviously, algorithms can start to play a factor, but there are way more issues that a developing brain's just not ready to deal with. So,
no. Okay. Yeah. Brenda, do you think cutting it off at 16 is the way to go, or do you think we should start and a little bit like the smoking age, basically say, okay, 8-year-olds, next year 9-year-olds, 10, so actually sort of before they get into it, start banning it, so it's a progressive thing?
No, I'd say cut it off hard. It's like, why would you sacrifice a whole lot of younger cohorts? It's social media under the age of 16. This technology is not good. The research is very, very clear on this. It is irrefutable. And it's the rule in our house. It's just it is. In our house, you don't get a phone until you're at least 16, and then you pay for it yourself. And it's worked fine. So I think what it will do is actually, the law acts as pedagogy, as a teacher as well. And it will teach people what I hope is they come down hard on any social media outfits that try and skirt around the rules, or anybody that tries to break those rules, because the simple fact is that it won't work unless there is proper enforcement. And my sense is that it's a little bit misleading when they talk about a ban, because in reality, it's just an age restriction. That's what it is. You can still be on it. You just have to meet the age criteria. And at the moment, in theory, it's supposed to be 14, but clearly it's crept right down.
Okay, so shouldn't we be putting some pressure and responsibility back on the companies that provide it? Meta, TikTok, all of them.
Oh, absolutely. And I really think that's what I hope they'll come down hard on those companies and say, look, because for them, the reality is this: a lot of people talk about this great tool and this wonderful thing. They are mining you as the data source, and they are selling you and your information for their own profit. And so, this is a corporatized control of a society that's not healthy at all. And so they should absolutely be held to account and just told, look, you are not to go near anyone under 16. And if you do, holy moly, we'll cut your hands off. And I mean, obviously, metaphorically, not literally there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we knew that. Alfred, final say?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of friends and family that I know that are in technology. I mean, Silicon Valley, a number of their technicians actually don't allow their children to have that form of technology. Yeah. Why? Because they know what the algorithms are. They know the harm that it has. And the only thing I would say, and look, if we can do it for smoking, we can do it for this. But what we do need to learn from that is that we need to arm parents with information so they understand, they can talk to their kids, they can tell them the reasons why, they can give them the research, they can try and walk them through. And we need to have a real strong campaign, consistently letting people know the harm that has been created. And I think that when you do that, then it's possible.
Yep. Jonathan Haidt said kids are growing up as a phone-based childhood, and we need to return them to a play-based childhood, which is so true. All right, team, great discussion. Man, that was full on, and we're only slightly late. So thank you, Alfred, Brendan, Mel, Michael, great job. We will be back, Simon, tomorrow morning, Solid Ground at 8 a.m. There's also political playback on Thursday at 5. And we'll be back for Straight Talk next Monday night at 8 o'clock. Until then, have a great week.